Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the 2021 Marketing Seminar. My name is Mike Gunderson, and I serve on the Minnesota Association of Wheat Growers Board of Directors as Vice President, and I farm in Bijou, Minnesota. This seminar is a program of the Minnesota Association of Wheat Growers and the North Dakota Grain Growers Association. This program is possible through the support of our members. Please consider becoming a member of one of the state organizations. Membership details can be found on their respective websites, ndgga.com and mnwheat.org. We would also like to thank our sponsors of this program, AgCountry Farm Credit Services and the Northern Crop Institute. A few things to note: the entire seminar is being recorded. The video and presentation from each speaker will be available online at minnesotawheat.org next week. When the presentations are available, an email with the link to the presentations will be emailed out to the participants. There will be time after each presenter for a few questions. Please type your questions in the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Our first presenter is Rob Frayne. He's from AgCountry Farm Credit Services, and he will be going over global grain production and how it impacts the U.S. producers. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you and good afternoon. Again, as mentioned, my name is Rob Frayne. I'm with AgCountry Farm Credit Services. As you can see here, I am not Katie Tangen. Like any good risk management plan, you have to be able to call an audible. And so today some things popped up, so I'm filling in here for Katie for today. So we'll do a little bit of a September grain market recap and talk about what's going on in the U.S. as well as in the world. So first, just kind of starting off here, look at what the market performance has done from year to date. What have we done? And you can see 4 of the top 5 has really been energy. Energy's really taken off since the start of the year. This is again through September 1st. You can see the increase in the markets there. And then you can see as you scroll down some of the other more common commodities that we raise here in this area, but really leading the market right now. Energy's had a real strong year. It's not to say we haven't been strong in the other commodities as well. The other commodities are up significantly from before, and even if we go back a full 12 months, they've come up quite a bit. But right now, just leading the charge kind of for this calendar year, we're seeing that's energy is really taking over there. So one thing that we do look at, and obviously with our commodities, we look at what's going on in the weather. And just roughly about a month, look at how much the weather, the drought monitor has changed. And you can see we're still in a drought for primary most of our area here in North Dakota and Minnesota. But you can see how it has changed, gotten just a little bit better over the last few weeks. Obviously, we've seen a lot of rain. Now, is it too little, too late? That'll be the question. I think there's a lot of commodities and crop that we're raising here that has already suffered, and it maybe didn't get us any better, but maybe stop the bleeding per se, so it doesn't continue to get worse than what it was or where it was headed. So that's one obviously good thing that we had with the rains. Now we're also hearing some other issues with some of these rains causing some troubles in some of those crops that maybe had died out. And the example was that a producer today at Big Iron talking about his soybeans. They were already dead. Got a little rain, all of a sudden the bean pods start popping. So we start dropping beans on the ground. So already, struggling with a tough crop, possibly losing some more with this late rain. Hopefully some of the later variety soybeans, we can, capture a little more yield on those, and it'll also help. But definitely driving some of the markets and what's going on here locally as well. So I want to start with wheat. And, it's not very often we're excited to talk about wheat. Wheat, for the first time in a long time, is really kind of leading the charge here a little bit. Especially spring wheat, obviously in our area, what we raise, is really being strong. So just some of the highlights, we had some change here the last USDA, small changes in coming on September 30th. Obviously, we'll have the final small grain summary. So we didn't really have much in the September report here, but looking at, we had some lower inputs, some higher consumptions, and then they also reduced the projected price a little bit here, 10 cents to 6.60. So. But really what we want to look at too is also the global numbers. They're largely more comfortable than what the US is. So the US is getting tight. But if we do look at the global numbers, it's not quite as tight, or it's not really as tight as it was, say back in 07 and some of those years where we saw the really high wheat prices. But just being tight locally here in the US, we definitely are seeing that run the market and help with increase there. So feed usage is also helping lead the way with some of the demand here on the wheat as well. But just looking at where our stocks are, and this again is the US numbers, and looking at stocks to use ratio, the line graph, you can see projected here for 2021, just right around there underneath that 25, or 30% roughly on the stocks to use ratio, as far as what we have in. Go all the way back to about 2013 is what we were that tight in the past, and definitely seen some rallies back then too, but not quite as tight as it was going back to 2007, where I believe that's when, dare I say it, we saw that $20 wheat. Now, people in the room probably are saying, did Rob just say $20 wheat? I did, and I'm saying we're probably not going to get there, but we just look back to what we had in the past, and obviously there's back then, I don't have the numbers up here, but the global supply was much tighter, and so that was much more of what drove those prices back then. So you can see in my mind, we're heading in the right direction. Wheat is getting tighter in the US, and this is helping lead the charge of where we're at there. So I think the higher prices, they are cutting into our exports. I don't know if it's enough though to raise the carryout any more than what we're projecting, but we will see that probably continue as well, as we all know, high prices cure high prices. So now there isn't a direct correlation to stocks to use ratio versus the price, but just to kind of give you an idea of where this is at, if we look at where our stocks to use ratio was and what the price was for those years, it's a little bit correlated, but it's really not directly correlated. You can see where we're at here today. We're kind of seeing right around, again, around that 30% roughly stocks to use ratio, and correlating, if it were to correlate directly, it'd be right around that price there at the 660, 687. So it's not direct, but possibly we could be getting close and looking at keeping these numbers where they're at here as well. Now just looking at the hard red spring wheat. So this one again is a little bit tighter, and this is back where I kind of mentioned that 2007 year, and that's why, because here you can see where both our carryout and our stocks to use ratio is very similar to 2007. Now I'll say it again, I did say $20 wheat, but I'm not saying we're getting to $20 wheat, because again, what drove $20 wheat in 07 was the global numbers, not specifically the US. So with the US where it's at today, we already seen a nice rally, obviously from a year ago and where we're at. And then, wheat's going to lead the charge. And I know we've harvested, a lot of people were pleasantly surprised with their wheat. Some obviously were very disappointed, depending on if you caught that little extra rain or not. And we did, I did hear of some wheat fields being destroyed and dissed under. And so obviously all of that is leading to our lower numbers. But we do have some spring wheat out there to sell. Now, the drought didn't end at North Dakota and Minnesota. Obviously, it went up into Canada as well, affecting their crops and some of their production numbers too. But, at the end of the day, we are really tight on the spring wheat, and we've, winter wheat, we've got other numbers there too. But as far as the spring wheat price, what we're seeing here, there's a lot of support. I'm not going to sit here and say we're going to continue to climb and go up, but I do like the support and the support levels that we have. Most farmers that I know like to raise wheat. They don't necessarily like the numbers and the financials of raising wheat over the last 20 years, but we like to raise wheat. We get those acres done early, get them out of the way, and so that could lead a charge with acres looking at the 2022 crop. Now, I don't want to get ahead. We still got to harvest our corn and soybeans in this area, but people are already doing some planning for 2022, and wheat could be leading the charge with the current markets and where they're at today. And I think we have a lot of support in order to raise some of those, to raise more acres of wheat. I'm just going to touch briefly on durum, because durum's a really interesting animal. And so just to kind of show you here where our stocks to use, we've dropped significantly. Now durum is a lot more specialized and used in specific areas and specific uses, but we've seen over the last 4 years just the drastic drop and decline in our stocks to use, as well as our carryout. And I threw on top of this chart, we threw them some imports. And so you can see the change there where we've started to increase the imports on the US Durham balance sheet. And that's just because we did drop so fast, so quickly. Now, I know there's some buyers don't even have a quote out there. They're not even willing to put a bid out there on Durham. We did see a huge spike and rally in that crop. All I can say is that one's going to be tight for a while, and we'll see what happens and how that might get corrected. Today I was talking to somebody at one of the producers, and do we think we've hit a high? Who knows? The next time the next buyer really needs some, will there be a bid out there that'll be just as high or not higher? I don't know that, but I think this is one market to really watch. It doesn't take much to flood this market either. So again, if we start talking 2022 crop, it's hard to look at where we're at today and decide to be raising some Durham, although it does look attractive to many, but it doesn't take many acres also to flood that market and reverse this fairly quickly with a decent average to above average yield. It wouldn't take much to flip that. So. And again, I encourage you, I think there's a link there to ask questions. Make sure you send in your questions and we'll address anything that comes in that way as well. So feel free to send in your questions. So looking at the world wheat, again, looking at world wheat production versus just the US, kind of what we're seeing. We've seen a lot of increased production from India, and Australia's really recovered. They were fighting that multi-year drought and some of the struggles that they've had there. They've had some recovery there, a little better. The Chinese production is also increasing. It's not a rate sufficient to meet the increasing demands, but they are increasing nonetheless. Along with the Eastern Asian countries is kind of interesting, specifically looking at Bangladesh, having increased preference for some of the wheat-based products and some of their diets and things that have changed their demand on some of those products. So looking at that graph, you can see the major global exporters, which would include the US, as far as how much we produce compared to some of the other countries for the world wheat. And again, we're mixing with that global exporters. But what I want to show is how the other countries have really taken on the production of wheat. I think wheat is harvested, and I'm sure Frayne or some others could correct me, but I want to say it's every month out of the year there's wheat harvested across the globe. So as countries, and no country wants their people to starve, and wheat is definitely obviously a food product, and that's one of the easier crops for countries to learn how to raise and to find that crop, the soil that could raise it. And so we're just seeing a huge increase in production from other countries that haven't normally raised a large amount, and they're just slowly increasing the amount that they are raising with it. So, and then you can also see there China, although slight increase has been pretty steady over the years, but just a little bit of increase. And actually the major exporters are decreasing over the last few years as far as how much wheat that they're raising. So a little bit of a shift looking at the global status on where we're at on wheat. This a little bit tough to see in this chart, but looking at the graph here as far as where global wheat prices are at. This was a few days ago or about a week ago or so when we pulled these numbers, but you can see where we're at as far as the export bids. So this would be on a metric ton. You can see where Canada and the US are at, near the top. And again, this just shows a little bit of what the weather that we've had and the production that we have available to export and to ship out, and obviously what our market has done because of the limited supply. But you can see here now where the Australia, Russia, EU obviously are much more attractive, and even Argentina, as far as how much their prices are for export. And so when you look at somebody buying on the global market, this is where unfortunately high prices can cure high prices, and why I said earlier we're seeing a decrease in some of our exports and our projections, because we have kind of risen to the top and one of the higher prices out there when you look at the global market, and where we're seeing a shift to some of these other countries that are producing the wheat and have it available at lower levels. All right, and again here showing China and their production. You can see that increase in what China, I showed it earlier, but in the increase in China's production, as well as their imports. They'll still continue to increase their imports slightly, not a lot, but a little bit every year, going back to about 8-9 years there. I see they continue to import just a little bit more and more, and they still have a increase in their production as well, able to meet the demands and the needs that they have there in China. Now, we're not personally sending a lot of wheat, our own wheat to China, but again, just showing some of that global demand. And here's China's supplies. So, all right, I covered wheat, and if there's no questions, we'll just keep moving on, or maybe we'll wait till the end, and we'll answer some questions at the end here. So, we've got corn. Corn's always exciting. And what happened with some of the stuff going on with the corn? Well, we saw Hurricane Ida hit. I don't remember the exact date anymore, but the last couple of weeks as a Category 4. It's 150-mile-an-hour winds coming in. We saw rain from 15 to 20 inches in some of those same areas where it came in and hit in Louisiana. So they actually, the survey gauge in New Orleans actually detected that the Mississippi River was temporarily flowing backwards because of the surge and the amount of water coming in with that hurricane, and actually push the water in. Now, that's not the first time that's ever happened, but it's again very rare. And as we know, a lot of our production, U.S. production, and other items go out New Orleans or out the Mississippi. Obviously, that's going to cause some issues and some infrastructure issues and some concerns that we have with our shipping. Here's just a picture that we saw of, Cargill saw some damage. CHS lost the transmission line to their terminal. The two of them, the capacity is about 9% of the annual exports from the US. So again, it's a pretty good number. And the big question here is, when are they going to be shipping again? Now, I've had a lot of conversations on that. We don't know when. There's no timeline really out there, but it's not only the physical damage that you see here in these pictures, but the bigger issue is power and electricity. And that's some of the struggles that they continue to have down there. And we don't know how long that's going to take just to get power back to some of these facilities. Maybe shorter than we know, or maybe a lot longer. And how is that going to affect the traffic going out of the Mississippi and out of that port? So concerns there is that definitely short-term concerns. And the question gets to be is how long will that continue to struggle? This is just kind of an interesting slide. You look at Forrest Gump kind of smiling and waving, because those across basically kind of just across the river had some damage, but they basically will be operational as soon as they get power. So they're more short just the power, and the river is open-ish kind of. I think the quote that we heard was, it's a large field of partially sunken barges. So kind of like a barge graveyard. The river's open, but it's open for daylight only, I believe, travel, unless that has changed. The last I heard, it was just open during the day, and definitely slow as they maneuver around obstacles such as sunken barges. And so not going to be traveling out of the US quite as fast as we have in the past, which definitely could create a bottleneck and a backlog to us in trying to get some of our grains. Now, thankfully for the majority probably on this call here today, our crops go out the Pacific Northwest, out the PNW. And so this I think is going to be more support for what we're seeing locally in basis and some others. And so if you really look at the rail lines, definitely we have the river going, the river system going down as well. But if you kind of look at the rail lines and what we're looking at to go with the PNW, there's only so many rail lines to ship it, right? And if Cargill and CHS, are shut down, or a few of their terminals are shut down here down in New Orleans, how do they redivert or shift the direction? And the only way to really do it is through the rail, which a lot of that rail is already spoken for, and not that it's not for sale. Everything's for sale for the right price. And the question gets to be is, what's that price going to be? And what are they willing to pay for it to get it there? So we still have the global demand. The global demand isn't necessarily shrinking just because we had a hurricane hit the US. So we're going to have to try to meet some of that. And we've got some commitments to make. And this is where they need to try to manage through, some of those decisions. This was, I want to say this was Monday, either Friday or Monday, I don't remember, but we ran some quotes as far as what's the basis. So James Valley Grain, JVG, Cargill down in Wahpeton, Savage, which is on the river down south of Minneapolis, down south of the cities, And then West Memphis, I believe, kind of the last one before we get down to New Orleans as far as grain terminals and shipping. So here's kind of the basis that we're seeing, and I believe actually the cargo, I think at one point the cargo was actually supposed to be a positive 25, but James Valley grain at spot price, if you can deliver basically this week and get to them, where are they at on corn? They were 35 over the December futures. Cargo was 25, and they were as high as 90 at one point in time when they were really putting in. Cargo Wapton isn't obviously shipping, but they needed some corn to keep things running and maybe incentivize some people to take some early corn. But it's a little just different as far as Savage, which is a river, right on the river, has normally always been 25 to 30 cents better basis than what we see in the valley. Just because they're on the river and it's a little cheaper to get the crop down that way. So, and then Memphis, you can see here at negative 60, you can just see the bottleneck happening as we go south down the Mississippi River. If we look out a little further out, you can see here going through out to November on some of the new crop, where we're at minus 23, minus 20, 25. The first half of November Savage, because once the river freezes, they're done. They can't ship anymore really. So they'll wait and see how the weather holds out there. But you can see right there where finally they think that maybe the Mississippi will get back to normal and start being able to ship and have more of a competitive rate. But then I also throw out here the PNW on the far right. If you're looking at that one, where they're at now, that's what they're willing to pay, the elevators that are shipping to them. Obviously, it's definitely a lot higher out there and willing to try to get the grain to come out their way. And again, some of these buyers are also trying to ship some of our crops that direction. But when you look at a map, I actually looked at a map here a couple days ago as well. It was just interesting. A little bit of soybeans, getting ahead of myself, but both soybeans and corn, you can just really see where the valley was 20, 30, 40 cents better on basis than even southern Minnesota, Iowa, and some of those other states south of us, which is a little bit backwards. And a lot of that is just trying to redirect this grain and this traffic to a different than New Orleans, which isn't all directly because of Ida, but a lot of it. Definitely that hurricane has had a big impact on what we're seeing in our commodities. Another reason for support. I always get the question, so does that mean basis is going to continue to get better? No, it's relative. If I would show you this for the last 5 years in September that this was your basis, most people would love to have these basis numbers. These are pretty strong basis numbers. And generally speaking, you can say a round number in the valley, 50 under. Wasn't that many years ago we saw $100 under basis on corn. So the fact that we are at 20 under, 25 under, to me, I look at that as we have a lot of support there. The potential for that to get better yet, just because of what's going on. But I think the better news is we have really good support to maintain these numbers. Now, again, these are all kind of nearby. Deferred months are going to be a lot different as things correct themselves and rearrange and get moved along. And maybe some of these elevators get back up and going and terminals get up and running. So we do have a question.
Okay, Rob, with HRS, we have seen at least a 50-cent price drop due to a sell-off in futures and increase in basis in the last few weeks. Do we expect to see further drops, especially if corn outproduces USDA estimates and subsequently drags wheat down with it?
Great question, great comment. Yes, we have seen some slippage in the futures on the wheat. Wheat is only so strong. We can only go so much. Corn and soybeans definitely have a huge impact on that. And if we continue to see the corn slip, will it slip down? Will it continue to pull down wheat with it? In my opinion, yes, I think it will, but at what rate? I don't know that it's going to be penny for penny and pulling it down, but wheat is strong. It's got a lot of fundamentals behind it. We have a lot of support there, but that support can only hold so much. And at the end of the day, as things continue to slide in some of the other commodities, corn has a lot of influence on a lot of things. And it's not just wheat. It's not just, soybean. You start talking energy again as well, ethanol, some other things. All of those potentially can pull down and help pull that corn down as well as corn can pull down. So my answer to yes, I think we could see it slip. I think we have at least a little better support today than we would have had last year, the year before. because numbers are tight and we have a little more fundamental support to maintain wheat. But I do think that it could fall victim to sliding with some of the other commodities as well. That is potential. Thanks, great questions. Keep on asking if you got it. So, all right, looking at the US crop, corn crop here, where we came in here in September, relative to where the average estimates were. They changed the yield, the actual yield for corn to 176, where the industry was estimating about 175, so slightly above. Harvested acres basically come in right about where they were projecting or estimating, and then you can see there the production numbers were a little bit more total production than what trade was expecting. All of those numbers, up from our August, as well as those numbers are definitely up from 2020 crop years. So that is definitely influencing the market right now, and a lot of this was probably already in the trade. The trade had a lot of this already built in, but as they come out and other factors obviously influence, and we've seen a little slippage because of it, but these are some of the numbers that are coming here now. Now, is it that big of a deal? Just looking at where the September US corn yield, where it came in versus what the trade expected every year. It really came in pretty close to where we expected. If you look historically, how far back? I mean, typically it's been above what the trade is expecting for the month of September. But really, if you look back, to 2020, this is 2020 is the last one here on the right. I think it was 2021 was 0.3%. And I think back in 2020, it was like 1%, 0.1%. So not too far off. So they're very close to where the trade expected it. And that's partially why I think there wasn't huge fireworks on it, and it didn't move too much. And then I think, right now we've already moved beyond the report. The trade is already, this is old news. So, but just giving you an idea of where things are at, they definitely come in close to where trade was. And I think not that they're getting better as we go along, because we can see here not that long ago, 2018, they were way off from where they were projecting it. And that sometimes is where we see more of the fireworks, just where this report is way off from what the trade sees. And hence this isn't driving the market too crazy for this year. So where did they make some of these changes as far as the corn acres? Here you can see, and I like to look at North Dakota, 14% increase as far as the harvested area of corn. I think they thought with the massive drought, how many acres are we gonna work up or not harvest, as well as there's always the silage and other things that we do with some of the corn acres. But they decided that there's going to be a few more acres, according to this, that they're going to have a few more acres of corn harvested in North Dakota. 14% increase from 3.3 or 3.3 million basically up to 3.8. So enough of an increase there. Minnesota folks that are on here, to see the numbers here, slight decrease in Minnesota. Not too drastic as far as that. Yields, same thing. We had big change here, and not big change, but significant change in the Minnesota yield. They increased it from August from 166 to 174, almost a 5% increase in their projected yield on corn in Minnesota. North Dakota as well, they increased it. Now only 2 bushels, so only about 2%, just 1.9%, so not a large increase, but big difference here. We also got some rains. We got the rains the end of August, and some of that is influencing here. As well as through the month of August, we saw the corn hold on much better than anticipated. I think if you talk to a lot of the producers, things are tough, but they're holding on better than one would expect. I mean, when we had 6-8 weeks of no rain for a lot of people, what they went through, and for that corn to still remain green. Now the question always becomes, what will it weigh? Will it be light? Was it too hot? Warm overnights, things like that. Too many days of 90 degrees. All those impact and influence the corn crop. And so we'll have to wait and see till it's in the hopper or in the bin to see what we actually have. Again, these, this based solely on estimates here. We'll see what happens once it's harvested here in a few weeks or months. So, one thing here that, also caught, I guess, it's the start of the 2021 marketing year. And so obviously we have a long ways to go before we have any final numbers here. But if we look at the 2020 crop and where we're kind of coming in, and these will be finalized, here at the end of this month. But the thing that caught a lot of people's attention is the projected price. projected prices used in a lot of your farm programs, or in almost all the farm programs that are out there to determine if there's any payments. And our projected price at 445 for the 2020 crop, and also now we're projected 545 for the 2021. Those I would say are unfavorable for any farm program payments because of that high price, and where the yields are at, we probably won't see much. But again, comparing to where our actual ending stocks for 2020 at 1.1 billion bushels, going from 1.1 in 2020 to 2021 at 1.4. Now, again, that 1.4 has got a long ways because we're just starting the marketing year. So that 1.4 ending stocks for 2021, they'll continue to adjust all the way till September of next year. So a long ways, and we don't even have that in the bin yet. So that will continue to change, but you can see where it's again higher than where the average estimates were at, and as well as higher from the August numbers when they were put out as well. So. And here's put in a chart form so you can kind of follow along with the chart. The carryout, bushels there, the bar graph, the line is the stocks to use measured on the right. So you can see where we dip down into those 2010, 11, 12 crop years as far as stocks to use. So what percent did we have left over of what we used? We slipped down into those numbers for 2020. Now we increased a little bit projected in 21, but I don't take that number too seriously right now because we're a long ways away from that being final. But again, it gives you an idea of why the markets are doing what they're doing. We saw, pretty nice rally. If you go back to that 11, 12, 13, we saw nice rallies because things got tight. We had a lot of demand and we had short supply. We're kind of seeing some of the same things. So again, I look at this as great support relative to a year ago. This rally started in August, and again, early August, I want to say we were at $3 futures for new crop a year ago. And where we're at today, we've come a long ways. Now, will it continue to climb? I'm not as bullish on that, but I'm bullish on the support and the fact that we hopefully can sustain some of these levels. And obviously we're going to move up and down throughout the year, but I think we got a lot of numbers here showing us the support that we do have on the corn to hold. The next thing is going to be basis, and how do we manage to do that as well? That's going to be a whole nother marketing strategy or plan, I think. And again, it's not exactly correlated, but stocks to use, versus price, where are we at relative to his history? You can see where we should show around that 518 roughly where we're at on that one. So I'm going to skip through some world carryout. Just quickly on the world carryout, we're going in the right direction. It's getting tighter, but yet the world supply is there. We still have a lot of carryout worldwide. Now, built into these numbers are China. And you can see where roughly you can guess when China numbers got added here, but you can see the big increase in 2017 when China found quite a bit of corn laying around. Now, is it there? Isn't it? I'm not going to be the judge of that, but we know that those numbers are in here. And although the big increase there in 17, we've seen that continue to get a little bit tighter through the years and going in the right direction, which I think again will help support some of these prices that we have. So. All right, that's corn. I'm going to go to soybeans. I got to probably put it on auctioneer speed here real quick. Where are we at on the soybeans? In the last report, they changed some of the numbers here as well. We saw a little bit of an increase in what the trade was expecting versus the actual yield, and a little bit less acres harvested than what the average or the trade was expecting as well with those numbers. And then comparing them to where we're at in 2020, both of which, higher than where we were a year ago. So with the soybeans. Where do the soybean changes come? Again, we look at, in this case, we're looking at North Dakota. The acres increased just a little bit. North Dakota, 1.4%. The Minnesota folks, you can see my numbers here, stayed even. That didn't change any as far as the acres on the Minnesota side, but yield, on the other hand, increased quite a bit in Minnesota, 9% increase on the Minnesota wheat from 43 to 47. And then on the North Dakota side, just a slight increased a bushel, about 4% increase in the North Dakota yield as well on the soybeans. So balance sheet changes from 2020, lower exports. In 2021, a little bit higher beginning stocks number and higher production. A little lower crush, higher exports. All in all, when we look at the end, trade expected 166 million bushels to end 2020, and USD is at 175. So trade expected also 190 to end for 2021, and again, that's a long ways away. USD is at 185, but our projected price did decrease down 80 cents from August to September. So again, what's going on? The soy oil balance sheet obviously is also influencing this with higher, carry in, lower production, lower inputs. The demand on that some lower biofuel, higher food, feed, industrial, and lower exports as well. Again, projected price still at 65 cents a pound on the soy oil as well. And get to some charts here. Soybean, here's a carry out. Now you can see again why we're looking at soybeans being tight. Again, not back to the 2013 numbers, but similar to where we're at with 11 and 12, as well as 8 and 9. And the reason for some of the volatility in that as well. So, but look how fast we can change. But also look, we're in 2015 to 2018, 3 years, how fast we can go to excess supply. And again, 3 years from 2018, 2020, how fast we can go to short supply. So soybeans is the volatile one. And a lot of that gets to do with acres, increase and decrease in acres from year to year, as well as the yield. And as we look at a tougher yield and some lower acres, we can definitely change that really quick, but we can also change it with an increase in acres and an average yield. So I think that's where we see the volatility happening in the soybeans, and the market definitely trying to follow that and flush some of that out as well. But if we look at global soybeans, it's not quite as volatile. So again, I'm going to go back and forth here a little bit. Here's the US numbers, how fast it can go up and how fast it can go down. And if we look at the global, it's just a little bit of a steady increase in ending stocks. And our stocks to use is just slowly trendline increase. So again, we haven't seen the huge volatility in these numbers. If you look at the global, it's just, for us, it's the demand we get from other countries that are buying our soybeans, or the lack thereof, and how quickly we can get a surplus based on what's going on in the global market, and how much we export or don't export is really influencing the US numbers more than the global, because again, the global demand is there, and the total demand hasn't changed a lot in the global picture, and hence why you see these numbers stand, and they just go to where they can find the soybeans for the right price. And whether that's South America or whether that's the US, that's where the countries just continue to shift their focus. So, all right, well, I think I saved a little bit of time here yet for questions, but really in summary, we're looking neutral to a little bit, bearish on the corn, soybeans, and wheat, but I think there's a lot of support there. I'm not going to use the term drastically bearish. I think that bearish to me is where we're not going to go up much more. I think we've kind of got a lot of support where we're at relative to where we were a year ago. The end of the month, we'll get the quarterly grain stocks for all three, plus the small grain summary for wheat. So we'll get the finalized numbers there as well. So that could be interesting to see what that comes in as well. And again, given the proximity to historical highs, I think it makes sense to look at 2022. But I'm really, really cautious of your inputs. We've seen the inputs going up over the last 12 months. They tend to go up when we see the market go up, the commodities. They don't tend to go down nearly as fast. And that's my concern right now is, last thing we want to do is lock in high inputs and leave ourselves open on the marketing side. And we could potentially come down the road here in 12 months to 12 to 14 months when we're selling that 2022 crop. Relative to where they all are now, I think we're a little bit better. If we're going to do one, we should probably do the other. So if you're looking at locking in some inputs, you should probably look at locking in some of the revenue side as well, and vice versa. If you're looking at locking in some of the revenue, lock some of those inputs, because there's nothing to say these inputs can't continue to increase more than where they're, even though they're near historical highs as well. So with that, we'll see if we have any questions that are out there. I'm sure somebody has a question. I do these enough, hopefully, that we'll give a little bit of time here and just make sure we have one or two questions that might come in. I think overall things to look at is, I didn't talk a whole lot on the rail freight, and I think others speaking today might touch base on that a little bit, but A lot of our local buyers here, local co-ops, elevators, have their freight locked in. And the question will be, on a slow year or a dry year, we'll have a few less bushels for them. Will they look at selling some of that freight, selling some of those rail cars and possibly taking advantage of that high demand? Or will they actually have an even stronger basis to try to get more bushels for their own throughput? So those will be things I think that we'll watch for. And I think a few of the other speakers coming on will also be touching base on a few of those topics. So last call for questions. If there is none, I appreciate everybody's time, and we'll look forward to seeing you again sometime, probably in person, hopefully. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks once again, Rob. We certainly appreciate your input and AgCountry's support here. Next up on schedule, we have Betsy Jensen. She is a farm business management instructor at the Northland College. She and her husband farm in Stephen, Minnesota, and we always enjoy having Betsy on our program. Once again, welcome, Betsy.
Where do I click? There we go. Okay, sorry, all this technology. I do sure wish we were in person, so I look forward to seeing some of you guys and gals in person in the future. But today I want to talk a little bit about how to take a fall. And I got a compliment on my presentation headline. They said, how do you come up with such good headlines? Well, here's how I came up with it. It was the summer at the Olympics. So if you guys were watching the Olympics, what was the average age of the skateboarding medalists? So not the participants, but the people who got medals. 14, 18, or 23. How old were those Olympians on the podium? Well, they were 14. And the reason they're 14 is because they can survive the fall. You know, like if that was you and I, we would not be getting up again. They were young enough to take a fall. When you looked at them doing their competitions, they looked so young. And then after you watch the competitions for a while, you realize, oh yeah, they're not going to break as easily as the rest of us will. And the same thing happened in gymnastics. So I was watching gymnastics. Of course, everyone has to watch gymnastics. And in the warm-ups, one of the US Olympians completely missed the uneven bars and did a belly flop. And you know, the thing they land on is not soft. And so the one announcer said, ooh, that's tough. And the other announcer who was a gymnast said, no, that's what they're trained to do. You intentionally miss the bar. That's by design. You want to know how far you can push yourself. And one of the first things you learn as a gymnast is how to take a fall. It was intentional. So I didn't put the video up here, but if you guys want to YouTube it, Olympian gymnast belly flop, you can find it. And it still hurts to watch that. But that's how they land. That's how they train. They're designed to take a fall, and it's not a big deal. Nope, she got up and did it again, did her warm up again. And whew, okay. So there's a lot of people out there who know how to take falls, and thinking about our 2021 crop, you know, I didn't put a drought picture up here. You guys all know what the drought looks like this year, but we're looking at, you know, corn in Iowa last year. We're looking at tractors starting on fire. Our farm just got our crop insurance check for wheat. You know, any year you collect crop insurance is a disappointing year. And so it's not a matter of if your farm is going to take a fall, it's when are you going to take a fall and what are you going to do about it? What's going to happen? I'd say this year is probably the most often I've heard people say, I really screwed up this year. I've heard that more often from farmers this year than any other year. And I don't know that that's necessarily true. We got to talk about things a little bit, but I can just say a few words and you guys will start to cringe. What if I said the words falling numbers? Okay. I mean, how much of a cringe do you guys get from a couple of years ago? What if I said protein discounts? What if I say test weight? Okay. All of you guys, you know, farmers listening, you guys are starting to twitch a little bit when I say those words. There's a lot of things that can cause our plan to fall apart. And so we got to make sure we know how to put things back together again. So this is my job. Okay. I'm a farm business management faculty at Northland College. There's tons of us. There's 68 of us, I believe, in Minnesota, like me. I'm one of 68. North Dakota maybe has 20, South Dakota has a handful, Wisconsin, there's some of us, we do have a national organization as well. And so what we do is we meet with farmers and we help them understand their financials. Most of the farmers that I work with hate numbers. They hate meeting with me. No one is ever excited when Betsy comes to the farm, okay? And I've learned to accept that. Nobody looks forward. I know they do their books the day before I show up, but they want to get into production ag for producing purposes. They don't want to get in for financial purposes. And it's my job to make sure that they get the financials done as well. Now, the other issue is, who do I work with? I work with all different sizes, big, small, young, old. It doesn't matter. I got farmers with a couple hundred acres. I got some in the 5 digits with acres. There is no typical farm management student. So I haven't done any cash flows for 2022 yet. It's still quite a bit early to be doing that. But this is what I do in the winter. I'll meet with you guys on your farm and we'll go over some numbers, and this is our sample farm. It's called Coasting Farms. Okay. I Am Coasting is the name of the farmer. And so, we zoomed in a little bit. If I was on your farm right now, I'd be looking at these numbers and I'd say, oh, we can meet your term debt coverage ratio. You can meet your loan payments. Your working capital is going to go up. I think we have a plan here that works. The problem is, when am I meeting with farmers? January, February, March. Things change significantly from when we developed this plan to when things actually happen. And so we got to figure out what happens when the cash flow falls apart. What happens when this plan that I've spent hours with you working on, your acres, your anticipated expenses, your anticipated revenue, what happens when it falls apart? One of the first things I want to ask you guys, and this is from all of the questions I've had this year when farmers have told me I've made so many mistakes this year. We need to ask, did the plan really fall apart? I mean, I know it didn't go as planned. Nothing went this year as planned, but did it really fall apart? So what's the definition of falls apart? And is there a reason to panic? Okay. So this is just kind of some ideas I threw up there. On the cash flow, I'm thinking of a river or valley cash flow. We were probably using 70 bushels for wheat yields. And then 550 is the price that FSA told us to use. I get told what price I can put in the cash flow. I don't get to pull numbers. There's planning prices that the Farm Service Agency gives us, and banks generally use those planning prices as well. So North Dakota has them. Minnesota has several different regions that we use the planning prices. And so roughly we were looking at grossing $385 an acre. Well, yields in a lot of cases didn't go as planned, maybe 45 bushels. And I plugged in $8. Okay. We're counting for some maybe forward sales. And then maybe you got $9 off the combine. Maybe you're going to get $880. You're looking at $360 for a total per acre. This certainly didn't go as planned. This was not the plan, but it's not terribly far off either. I mean, obviously $25 an acre, we'd love to have that back, but I don't know that I would call this a disaster. Once you sit down and go over the numbers, things do tend to look a little bit better. Now Durham, okay, I did my best with Durham. Have patience with me. So Durham, right now, USDA says yields are 23.6. And I said 950. I know the market is probably like $13.50, $14 right now. But I'm going to assume maybe you forward contracted. I'm not sure. Durham, this is a stretch. Okay. I don't generally work with Durham people. So I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of Durham, which we know was a disaster in North Dakota this year. With the higher prices, if you had some to sell off the combine, or if you have some in the bins, there's still the possibility you can make money on Durham this year. Once again, nothing went as planned, but maybe we can work our way out of this. On the flip side, sometimes it's not revenue. This year we're looking at revenue. We're looking at lower yields, but hopefully offset by higher prices. There's some years that repairs can be killer. Okay. I will caution you guys, if I'm doing your cash flow and every year you tell me your repairs aren't usually that high, they are. Okay. But there's some years you got hail on your shop and needed to reshingle it. Something blew up, or there are some repairs that can really, really hurt you guys. A little combine fire can, cost you a few extra bucks. On budgeted custom hire, some of those wet years where you ended up hiring the plane and hired someone to do a lot of your work. That's not always in the budget. Bugs, disease, and extra TLC. The one I always think about here is aphids on soybeans. When I'm doing the cash flows, I usually ask farmers, should we put aphids, should we budget for aphids on half of the crop? We don't know if we're going to end up spraying for those this year or not. Sugar beet guys, they sure end up, they don't know how many sprays of Sakos they're going to need. And so the extra TLC from the crop could certainly help, add up. And then unexpected family living expenses. And I know this pops up, and I'm not talking about the vacation that you guys planned to Disney World. That's not what I'm getting at. I'm talking about, health issues, family emergencies. Those can certainly throw a wrench into your cash flow plan as well. Okay, so let's say you did have a bad year. Betsy, I did. Thanks for the pep talk, but nope, it's official. I had a bad year, and I'm going to be short cash. And so I do want to talk a little bit about debt restructure. All right, so this is I have a few trigger things, and this is one of my triggers is debt. Okay, debt can be good. All right, and this was a headline from the Wall Street Journal. So I saved this because when I tell farmers that debt can be good, they usually look at me like, no, we gotta get rid of all of our debt. So the Wall Street Journal headline says, "Buy, borrow, die: How Rich Americans Live Off Their Paper Wealth." So they're taking out loans for their family living expenses was the understanding of the article. But debt is how your operation grows, and it is a tool that should be working for your business and not against your business. So the debt I got, beginning farmers that don't want to go into debt. I got farmers close to retiring that don't want to go into debt. There's a lot of fear of debt, and that's not good financial, that's not good business. Okay. So in the future, really what I can emphasize to you guys is to keep the cash. Okay. Don't prepay your loans and then borrow money if needed. Prepaying loans, you need to take a second look at that. If you are thinking about doing that, that is definitely, it's not a good idea in most cases. I know nobody likes loans, but farming is not Dave Ramsey. It's not. I mean, that's not, personal finance is totally different than farm finance. And I think we've maybe pushed farmers to not loan. And keep in mind, I don't get commissions off of loans. Okay. I don't have a portfolio. I'm not getting anything out of this. But if you have cash on hand, that's probably one of the best ways to avoid a fall to begin with. If you already have cash on hand, that's definitely something that's going to help you avoid the fall. And I usually use, for working capital, I usually use an air mattress. Like, are you sleeping on a towel when you're going camping? Do you have like a nice air mattress? Do you have like the super air mattress? Are you on this cot? Are you in the Ritz-Carlton? Okay, that's the size of your, the cushion that you are sleeping on. And that's kind of what working capital is. So we want to make sure that there's enough of a cushion there in case you do have a bad year. So this is probably the biggest question I've had. Do we need to change our marketing plans? Is forward marketing still a mistake? And I mean, we're still in a drought, and that does make forward contracting risky. It's not like we have excess moisture out there. We still need rains. And so do we need to change our marketing plans? And I am a creature of habit. I mean, I don't do anything crazy in a year. I typically sell this much before, and I always contract this one. And I'm very methodical about my marketing. But now we're looking at these high prices. We're in a drought. What should we be doing going forward for crop marketing? And this is one of them. This was dated September 7th. This was, I think from Bloomberg had this headline, force majeure at top fertilizer plant. They shut down their fertilizer plant and said, sorry, we can't fill your orders. We know you had fertilizer purchased. There's nothing we can do about it. That's terrifying. I mean, that's terrifying to think that you put together a cash flow plan, you had ideas, and a hurricane comes through and shuts down the fertilizer plant. So I know Rob talked about it earlier. If you're buying inputs, sell your outputs. Okay, we can't pay this price for fertilizer and then sell wheat for 5.25 next summer. It's not going to work. So to survive a fall, you need to make sure you don't have 2 falls in a row. Okay, that's kind of what really starts to hurt. So I do have a little confession at the bottom. I have already sold 22 corn, wheat, and soybeans. Not significant amounts, but is there more risk in forward contracting or not forward contracting? What is going to hurt me more? And so I think what September 22 spring wheat is like 7.25, 7.20, 7.25, which sounds like most years would be thrilled at. But then when you plug in your fertilizer and your fuel, you think, geez, I actually need 7.25 futures to do well and to avoid taking a fall on the second year. And so the cost of production has certainly changed. But if you are going to be purchasing fertilizer, if you're going to be purchasing fuel, I really think that you need to tie some of that together, because I think there's more risk in not forward contracting. But I'm conservative. I will say, I don't want to hit a home run. I don't want to store 3 years worth of wheat crop and hope that it hits $20. I just want to slow and steady survive farming. And so I think there is a lot of risk in not forward contracting. That is my bias for the year. So this is it's not statistically accurate. I just threw this up there. How many times do you regret selling $8 wheat? I just put a little slice in there. Because obviously $8 this year, I delivered wheat for $9.17. And so the $8 sale is not good. But if you look at the prices today, they're $8. We're looking ahead. We have the potential to get $8 for 2022. If you want to put in an order to sell wheat for $8 for 2022, how often have you regretted that sale? And I don't think it's happened very often. So this is another thing that I am terrified of farmers doing. Old and new crop fundamentals are not the same. And they're especially not the same in a short crop year. Okay. We have dramatically different fundamentals for 21 and for 22. And so my fear is rolling contracts. Okay. You cannot sell 21 crop in July of 22. Okay. If you want to do forward contracting for 22, you better sell that in one of the new crop months for 2022. And I've already had questions about this. Well, but I mean, I could roll, if we get back to a carry, we might not get back to a carry if we're a short crop. Generally short crops, we don't have carries in the market. Okay. So I don't think we're going to get back to a carrying charge. I mean, we are going to be short. We are going to have tight stocks. And I don't foresee the market 22 trading higher than 21 for if probably never. I'm not, we'll have to find out what happens in 2022, but I think this is one of the worst ideas I have ever heard in my entire life. I think it's incredibly risky and I would run as fast as I can away from this. Okay. It does have huge profit potential. You might make a ton of money by doing this, but what happens when you make a ton of money? What's the flip side? You might lose a ton of money too. Okay. I mean, like if there's ever big profit potential, there's room for huge losses as well. So if you can write down anything from this presentation tonight, make sure that you sell 21 during 21 and you sell 22 for next fall. Do not try to mix up those crop years. I think that is going to be a recipe for disaster. Yeah. Any questions that have come in yet? Not yet. Okay. Remember to punch in the questions if you guys do have them. If there is any confusion about this, there shouldn't be. Okay. Do not sell 22 in 21. If it's in the bin, you can sell it for 21. So I'm also concerned about, obviously taking a fall 2 years in a row, but we remember the last thing that happened. And if forward sales worked last year, we do it again. If they don't work, we don't. Okay. And if you want to test this out, if you have like a toddler in your house, go ask that toddler, hey, do you want Kool-Aid or milk for supper? Well, milk's the last thing you say. So they're gonna go, milk. Okay, great. I mean, kids only have the ability to remember the last thing you said. And that actually goes forward for quite a bit as adults too. Okay? We remember the last thing that happened. And so I have some concerns that forward contracting was not the right answer in 21. Okay, we should have let everything ride and let it take off and go higher. But that doesn't mean that that's going to happen again. And so be aware of I call it recency bias. Whatever happened recently is what sticks in your head, and that's not necessarily the thing that's gonna happen. For things to happen 2 years in a row is often pretty unusual. Each crop year is unique. Okay, so like me, I'm a creature of habit. I've already sold 22 because I normally have 22 already sold. I'm not changing my marketing plan significantly. The only thing that I have done differently, I'd say this year, is I sold a lot of stuff off the combine. I saw the bids at harvest. You kind of, you look at your husband and think, are we really going to lose money if we sell wheat for $9.17? Nope. Okay, keep the trucks going. And so the thing that I did differently this year, I did sell quite a bit more at harvest. There's less in my bin than there normally is. But just keep this in mind. Am I avoiding sales because they didn't work last year? Is that a good decision? Okay, question?
Yes, good question. If you don't have enough bushels to fill 2021 new crop contracts, would you still advise against rolling those contracts to 2022?
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So the question was, if you're short for 21, you don't have enough bushels to fill your forward contracts, I would buy out of those contracts, because in the case, well, in just about every case right now, those could be in the money. And I'm rolling ahead to 22. Really, wow, that could really go bad. I really don't know that I like that idea at all. And you will find someone to tell you that it's a good idea. I guarantee someone out there is going to find you a way to buy, sell, buy this put, sell this call. We can make this work. I don't know that I would sleep at night if I did that. So I would be a little nervous about doing that, rolling those ahead. Yeah. Okay. You got another one?
Yep.
Okay.
2021 was the wrong year to forward sell. How many times in a decade does forward selling not work out like it didn't in 2021?
Okay. How often does that not work out? Oh, Frayne, do you have that number?
I don't.
Okay. I don't have it either. Ed Ussett from the U of M always has that number, and it's maybe like what, twice out of 10, do you think? It's not. Yeah. Rob, do you know what the number is for sure?
Not exactly.
No.
So.
I don't know that number for sure. Part of the problem is, we sold like December. I am delivering $6 wheat and $6 corn. Who would have thought that was ever the scenario? Those prices aren't supposed to be the same. And the problem with my $6 wheat is that I was wrong by $3. Normally when you make a mistake forward contracting, you're wrong by 50 cents. This year I was wrong by $3, and that's maybe, the knife is in the back, and that $3 amount kind of twisted a little bit. But on the flip side, I'm delivering $6 corn, which today looks like a good decision. Okay, so I'm wrong by $3 in wheat. I'm right by $1 in corn. I got a mix of stuff, I guess. I got some stuff that worked out great and some that did not. Yeah. So I don't know if anyone gets a chance, Ed Ussett has all those numbers, and if you do forward contract, it's not usually off by $3 in wheat is the problem. That's what hurts this year.
Ed says one.
Ed says one? Oh. Ed's online.
Yeah.
Okay, so Ed says one. Well, okay. If he's still online, Ed, how much are you wrong then? You should know that. How much we're not wrong by $3. It's like an average of not much. So Ed, keep the comments coming and we'll fill everybody in.
I got one more question.
Okay, one more question.
Can you please explain how a rolling contract works?
Okay, explain how a rolling contract works. Okay, I don't know that I can do that without like a whiteboard. Okay, so it would be, so I don't know. So let's say that, well, actually, let's do this. This is probably going to work out. This is one time I do want to roll. If you are at home right now, if you can go to September, Minneapolis wheat is like 720, 725 futures. And then December is like 714, 715. There's actually a little bit of an inverse in Minneapolis wheat from September to December. September is trading higher than December. Usually there's a carry in the market. So if you're going to be contracting 22 wheat, sell September and then wait to see if the market gets that carry. Then you would buy back September and sell December. So you normally, we say December is what, 10 to 15 cents higher than September, and that is not the case right now. The reason I'm saying do that roll in 22 is because you're within the same crop year. September and December are the same crop year. That's not one of the 7 deadly sins of crop marketing. Rolling from one crop year to the next in an inverted market like we have today, that is going to snap back very, very hard on you. Okay. So maybe that's the best way. Go look at September Minneapolis wheat, and then talk to your elevator. If you want to contract 22, your elevator will be more than happy. They'll sit down with you and explain, yep, we're going to sell the September today for 7.25. Sometime between now and the next year, we'll wait for December to go to a premium, and then we'll buy back September and sell the December instead. So, I mean, you're going to gain 30 cents, which to me, 30 cents in wheat, 20 to 30 cents, I guess. That's a lot of money in wheat. Okay. So crop insurance, I've already told you guys, I got my wheat crop insurance check. Yay. Any year you collect crop insurance is a bad year. And you got to determine what coverage you need. And this is so I know what I want for my farm, but when I go out to farms, I don't tell them what coverage to buy because their coverage is unique. And if more insurance helps you sleep at night, it might be worth it. Okay. If you want to buy a higher coverage, if you want to buy a lower coverage, if you want to get cat, you buy the coverage that helps you sleep at night. And this is really an individual decision. Some farmers do optional units, some do enterprise, but you know, there are farmers out there who don't need crop insurance. You know, they have enough cash. A crop problem is not gonna devastate their farm. I still think crop insurance is a very good deal. I think it's well worth it to buy federal crop insurance. Hail, I'm a little bit more lukewarm on, but federal crop insurance, I cannot imagine farming without it because of the peace of mind that it gives us. So, but I know that I have differences of opinions with a lot of my farmers over what coverage to take as well. So this is another thing that I've had quite a bit this fall. Don't make the fall worse. I can buy, trade, sell, re-own my way out of this. I have heard that from so many farmers. Hey, can you give me a call because I want to figure out what we can do. You know, I got this $7 wheat contract. Let's figure out what to do with it. Well, you're going to deliver on it, right? But then what should I buy it? Should we buy back wheat? Should I do this? So I mean, I say this all the time. The best way to make a small fortune is to start with a large one. Okay, I mean that's. I'm not going to be happy delivering my $6 wheat. It's not going to be fun. That check's going to come and I'm probably going to have a couple 100 bushels of overrun that they're going to price at, you know, $8 or $9, and that's going to look even worse. You know, it's just going to rub it in. But I don't want to try to buy or trade or try to figure out a way to get out of that. It gets very complicated. And once again, I didn't sell $6 for all my production. I mean, I had some at 8, I had some at 9. I mean, I sold on the way up. So I'm just going to smile and deliver the wheat and do my best to get through that contract. So there is a temptation to try to fix the contracts of forward contracting. And I don't know a good way to do that. I'm sorry. If there was, everyone would do it. But you're going to take a loss on some of your forward contracts. So here, just for fun, this is one of my favorite pages in the Wall Street Journal. This is the real estate sections. We got like, you know, Vero Beach, Florida, Boca Raton, you know, ooh, how fancy. I love looking at these. Well, if we zoom in a little bit, that was in the corner. If you guys, if anyone sees the Wall Street Journal, Central Minnesota, 52 million. So I currently do not have 52 million on hand to buy this land sale, but I think it's fun to see farmland sometimes advertised in the Wall Street Journal. So if I used to joke with my farmers, you know, like, at what point do you know you've had too much money? if you have 52 million to buy 10,000 plus tillable acres of Minnesota farmland, you've probably done fine. Okay. So maybe this will be the goal someday to not have the fall. I did go onto the website. It's farmlandforsalemn.com, and it's not a very good website. There's not much there, but it certainly caught my eye as I was looking at my $1 million beach properties. That it's just fun to look at. Okay, so the other thing I want to talk about is, when it comes to 21 losses, and I know right now in the audience we have farmers who had very little yields. I talked to a farmer today, great wheat yield, doesn't look like the corn and beans are going to be very good. We really are seeing everything. And I think the important thing to know is you're not the only one who suffered losses in 21. And it's going to happen again. And we got to be prepared for the next time it happens. So one of the things that I really want you guys to do is to make sure that you're getting into your lender right away. And it has, I've worked with a lot of farmers who have been in financial problems. Every farm ends up in a tight spot at some point or another. And after every time I'm done working with them, they have said, I feel so much better now, because you actually have a plan on the paper. You have a plan in mind. When you go to sleep at night, every worst case scenario spins in your head. That's just the nature of being. If you're thinking you're going to be short, if you're thinking you're going to have problems, you're the wheels are going to start turning when you lay down in bed at night. And I think about the one thing, I guess, if there's a lot of Valley guys listening, beet harvest 2019, who slept during sugar beet harvest of 2019? Nobody did, because we didn't know what was going on. Were we going to get the crops harvested? What was going to ultimately happen? And as soon as they called it, beet harvest is done. We know it's not done, but we're calling it. There was kind of a sense of relief because we didn't have the unknown anymore. And so what I really want you guys to do is, if you think that there are significant losses, if you think there's something going on, make sure to find someone to help you. Talk to your lender, find a farm management instructor. We're the ones that can help you out. Like I said, I promise you will feel better. And then I do think finding solution usually requires external insight. Sometimes it's hard for you to think outside the box. And so it is nice to have somebody else. And now, if your farm has been successful in the long run, there's no need to make drastic changes. If you've had one bad year, there's no need to make changes. If you're someone that cash flows doesn't work year after year, now we got to maybe tweak a few things. So here's my fall recovery plan. Here's what I'm going to do. I collected crop insurance. It hasn't been a phenomenal year. Okay, but the good news is that it wasn't as bad as I thought. Okay, because in July, when it's 100 degrees, I was convinced we weren't going to have a pound of canola out there. What canola can survive 100 degrees for that long, or upper 90s? We did. We had some canola. And then I did sell more crop this fall than I ever have. And the prices looked good. And I feel like there's more downside potential. It just feels good to not have to worry about my canola price. My canola's all gone. My pintos are all gone. And I do have forward contracts for 22. And then I didn't do anything wrong in 21. Mother Nature and I just had a few disagreements. Okay. Now the forward contracts, obviously I wish I could take those back, but I've already forward contracted for next year. This isn't something that I'm backing away from. This is something that I still want to stick with. I still want to be my creature of habit and have some risk management and forward contract, something for 22. I hope I sold my wheat for 7 1/4 and the rest of it goes for 12 1/4. That would be wonderful next year. But I have a feeling I forward contracted for 7 1/4 and a good chunk of it's going to go for 5 or 6. It was kind of our traditional wheat price. So in a perfect world, my prices change significantly. Any questions out there? Okay. Just as this is Minnesota Farm Management, this is all the colleges that have it. If you do need someone in North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, actually anywhere in the US, we're a small group. I know there's a lot of us, but we're kind of a small group. I can certainly get you in touch. So there is my email, and then a couple websites. I am a numbers person, so FinBin database is one of my favorite things to do. I know that's kind of geeky, but I do like our FinBin database at the Center for Farm Financial Management. If you ever need any finance numbers, it's just fun for me to play with numbers. And that's why farmers work with me. I like numbers, they don't. We're a good offset to each other. Yeah. Any questions popping in? Okay, no questions popping in. So I think I'm done. All right, remember, don't roll into 22. Okay, that's all. Let's keep that one in mind. Thank you, everyone. I hope to see you in person. Oh, sorry, I got one came in. That's okay. You can keep sending them in.
What percent are you sold for 2022?
Oh, for 2022. Oh, not much, like less than 20. I mean, I don't have, let me think. Soybeans, I'm probably 20. Wheat, it's less than 10, maybe about 7 or 8. And then corn, we never know what we're going to plant for corn. We're not really corn farmers. We're farmers who grow corn. Like we don't have a dryer, you know. And so I sold some. So we definitely have to plant some, but that is an acreage that might change quite a bit before next year. And part of it depends on fertilizer. I mean, if fertilizer goes through the roof, I don't have to plant corn. I don't have a dryer that I have to make a payment for, or a bunch of hopper bottom trailers or anything like that. So corn I have sold. So we're definitely planting corn next year, but the acres on that can be in flux. And then I haven't sold canola yet, but I think we just decided this week that we are going to plant canola in 22. And so I am probably going to look at pricing canola for next fall too. It's pretty darn good.
Have you pre-bought any of those inputs yet?
Yes. Yeah. I got fuel booked out actually through 23, I believe. And then, yeah, fertilizer too. Yeah. Okay. That's all I got. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Betsy. Certainly appreciate your comments and hearing from you every time you present with us. And just a reminder, once again, to please submit your questions at the bottom where it says chat on that feature, and you can submit your question at any time during the presentation. And the staff here will try to ask your question. Our final presentation is from Dr. Frayne Olson. Dr. Olson is a crop economist and marketing specialist in the Department of Agribusiness and Applied Economics at NDSU. Dr. Olson conducts educational programs and research in crop marketing and market analysis, crop contracting, and risk management. Will you please to help me welcome Dr. Olson?
Thank you.
Thank you, Brad.
Okay, I had to bring my cheat sheet up here because I know I'm going to have some numbers that I want to double check. Okay, and make sure I understand my technology. There we go. What do you know? All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for participating. I had to, when Rob was done, I had to go over and whisper in his ear and say, "Man, you stole all my stuff." So I do have some additional things, but there's going to be some repeat. I put a little bit different spin on some of the information. For those things that are somewhat duplicate, I'll try and move through those pretty smoothly. Please, as everybody has said, you know, the thing that drives this thing is the questions. So if you have questions, that's what really makes this interesting for everybody. So I kind of created the title for my talk today is, you know, this year, 2021 is really the tale of two crops. And I'll go through and try and explain why I chose that lingo or chose that title. Because one of the things I'm really concerned about, especially from a marketing standpoint and trying to get yourself in the right mindset to understand why is it that the markets are acting and doing the things they are right now. We are all creatures of habit. I mean, Betsy mentioned that a little bit. We all have kind of habits that we fall into. And one of those that gets a bit frustrating is we have the backyard syndrome, where whatever is happening in my backyard is happening everywhere. And why isn't the market responding? And that's specifically true this year, especially given the drought and the dry conditions we had here, not only in North Dakota, but also in Minnesota, South Dakota, Northwest Minnesota. I mean, this has been growing and expanding for a while. It's not a big shock to a lot of folks, but the fact that we have a drought in our region does not necessarily mean the market's got to respond with giving us higher prices. Now, fortunately, a lot of that has played out, and I'll try and explain why. But my concern is that we look at our back window and say, boy, it's dry. Why isn't the market responding? And I'm going to try and explain that so that when you think about taking your marketing plan, modifying that, putting it together a new one for 2022, that we have that as a backdrop or a context. So I know Rob talked a little bit about the Drought Monitor. This is the most recent one. It's updated every Thursday morning. This is kind of the same Drought Monitor map we've been looking at for most of the growing season. Now, one of the things I want to do is, as an add-on to this particular analysis, the same group of people are also doing what they call a Vegetative Drought Response Index. Now, I just stumbled across this recently. Apparently, it's been out there for a while. As I studied kind of what this map is telling us and how to interpret it, it actually makes a lot of sense. So what they're doing is they're taking the satellite imagery that you've heard of, NDVI, those vegetative index from the satellite imagery, how green is the crop. What they've done here is they've actually taken that and accumulated it. So let's say we have green early in the year and it starts to turn darker color or a lighter color, meaning that it's under stress later in the year. So it's accumulating how much greenness have we seen throughout the growing season. They say, well, what is that accumulated greenness in our crop this year relative to a 20-year average? So it's looking at not just the snapshot of what does the crop look like today, it's the accumulation of what did that crop look like throughout the growing season. And I guess in my thought process, that probably makes more sense because you can have part of the growing season in really good condition. We can have some that's in poor condition. Will they average out? So this is that kind of vegetative index that's been added up throughout the growing season. So obviously the darker, the yellows and the reds and the oranges, it means that yes, we're definitely below average. If you look at the white, that would be very typical. It'd be average for kind of the typical what we'd see over the last 20 years. Then those blue areas, those lighter kind of blue, and then as you get down into the New Orleans area, we're getting those darker blues. That's excessive moisture, or it actually has excessive greenness, if you will. Now, this is for the whole United States. So this is, again, a vegetative map across the whole US, recognizing we have a lot of pasture land, we've got some forest land. So you can also filter that out to look just at cropland acres. So what's showing right here is where are crops produced. And I want you to look at that for just a minute. And what does that picture tell you about the yield and yield potential that we have across the United States as a whole? Not just what's going on in your backyard, but more importantly, what's happening across the whole US. Now, I get this, and Rob mentioned it. I'm going to come back to it later on in my discussion as well. You know, what's happening in spring wheat, because spring wheat is so concentrated in this northern growing region, Durham as well. Durham is very concentrated in this northern growing region. Obviously, the impact on those markets are much stronger than they would be for corn or soybeans, which have obviously a bigger geographic dispersion. So I want you to kind of in the back of your head plant this vision of what's going on. I'm going to start with corn, then go to soybeans, and actually finish up with wheat, kind of the opposite of the order that Rob did. So when we're talking about corn and soybeans, because I want to start there, you know, there's a lot of concerns about what's happening in Minnesota, what's happening in southern Minnesota. I know I've driven back and forth the 994 corridor several times this summer. You know, there's a lot of areas that look pretty decent, and there's a lot of areas that look really, really tough in southern Minnesota. And then we've also talked a little bit about, well, what's the crop condition in Iowa? Iowa is obviously a big corn producer, a big soybean producing state. You can see based on that color that there is a stripe, there's kind of a pathway from central Iowa into kind of the border between Wisconsin and Illinois that, yes, they're in drought conditions. I'm sure you've seen some of that on social media where, wow, some of this Iowa corn crop looks pretty rough too, or Iowa soybean crop looks pretty rough. But also then let's look at what is considered normal or potentially above average. And in particular, let's look at that eastern corn belt. So when we talk about the Corn Belt, east versus west, typically that Mississippi River is that dividing line between the eastern Corn Belt and western Corn Belt. And thus the reason for my kind of title is that we have this tale of two crops. We have the western Corn Belt, which includes Iowa, southern Minnesota, parts of South Dakota, obviously North Dakota. You know, we've been having a tough year. Not a surprise to anybody. I do want to remind everybody, though, there's been kind of a frontal boundary where if you get into the eastern Corn Belt, they've had fantastic growing conditions. They've been getting in almost excessive rainfall, but again, with the warmer temperatures, with really early planting season this year, they were set up to have a really fantastic year. And the eastern Corn Belt, based on what we see today, is going to have that fantastic year. So the underlying question is, will the yields and the production from the eastern Corn Belt for both corn and soybeans offset some of the losses that we're seeing in the western Corn Belt? And that obviously has an impact then on the market psychology, on how many total bushels are we going to produce, you know, what is that going to do to our demand base? And I'm going to try and kind of finish this talk up with talking about basis and basis movements. It's going to, I think, have some really interesting nuances or some changes or shifts in the basis levels as well, because we're going to have to struggle now for several months to figure out how we're going to get the grain from where it's being produced to have it in the right position for use. So again, I'm trying to set this up and provide some context before we move on. So let's just jump into corn. In every presentation, I like to try and at least give you a snapshot of what is this balance sheet we talk about, the supply demand balance sheet. As a marketing person, you know, this is the stuff that these numbers are the ones I see in my sleep, right? These are the ones that I study and diagnose. And I know everybody tries to pick apart the USDA numbers to say, well, where do they have it right and where do they have it wrong? What do I think is happening relative to what USDA is saying? I don't want to go through a lot of these numbers today, but I do want to pick on a couple of them. Because right now, we're really, really focused on this production side. Very soon, in my opinion, very soon, we're going to be shifting to questions about demand base, how we're going to use up the corn, soybeans, wheat we've already produced. As we've had these rallies in the major commodities, as prices go higher, it's great on the farming side, but it makes it really tough on the use side. So have high prices done their job? As the high prices we've seen right now started to ration or limit the consumption part, and we're going to have that debate going on pretty quickly. So a couple numbers that I want to just focus on. Again, this is for your reference. Again, if you're going to look at this later, I know they're going to try and make the copies of the presentations available. I wanted to make sure this was in the packet. So let's talk about yields first, because that's right now been the big argument and discussion. The red line that bounces around is the national average yield that USDA puts together. They have actually a very sophisticated process they use to try and certify these numbers by the time we get into those official kind of last numbers that we see in January. Now, the blue line running through the middle is the Trendline Yield. So Trendline Yield just means it's the average yield that's been adjusted for technology and better farming practices. So think of that blue line as the average, okay? And the little dotted line on the far right-hand side is the USDA most recent estimate. Now on a little sidebar, I got a little pet peeve because I get a chance to listen and read a lot of commentary, market commentary from some very, very smart people. And I always learn a lot when I do that. And one of my pet peeves is the statement that, well, USDA is forecasting another record yield this year. Well, record yield means, yeah, let's look back historically and say, well, how does today's yield compare to the history? But they forget about the trend line. So even though this is the second highest yield on record for United States corn, it's average if you look at it from a trend line basis. So this year in the world of corn, we're going to have an average year across the US. So we always have some areas having problems. We always have some areas that have fantastic yields. So really on the corn side, we're kind of looking at an average yield adjusted for technology and farming practices. So one of my little pet peeves that's, we have to adjust for better yield and genetics as well as, again, general farming practices. Now, Online, this might be a little bit difficult to see. I tried to blow this up as large as I could and still have it fit on the page. This is the production report that USDA provided. And I know Rob had some similar kinds of information, but I wanted to talk a little bit about yields this or total production this year compared to last year for some key corn states. I'm going to do the same thing with soybeans. Okay. And I want you to think about the reason we focus so much on harvested acreage, well, planted acreage, harvested acreage, and yields is at the end of the day, we're trying to get to how many bushels do we have. So we can adjust, we can play all kinds of games, but the bottom line, we're just saying, how many bushels do we have in the system that we can use in the upcoming marketing year? So let's just drop to the bottom line and look at bushels. And I want you to compare the total bushels produced in 2020. So if you look at the far right-hand columns, the two columns on the far right-hand side, let's compare how many bushels were produced last year versus this year. Just in bushels. Let's forget about average yields and planted acreage for just a minute. And if you look at Illinois, get my eyeballs working, we're looking at about a 200 million bushel increase. We look at Indiana, and we're looking at about 100 million bushel increase. We look at Iowa, and again, everybody's saying, oh, well, we got some dry areas in Iowa. We got to watch this. We got to be careful. Iowa is also forecasting, based on USDA, about a 300 million bushel increase. So why was Iowa such a big increase from last year? Betsy showed some pictures of it, that derecho. Remember that storm that came through and wiped out some of the corn in Iowa? And it was a big deal. It did start taking some of our average yield down because Iowa was such a big crop. But we've known about those dry spots and those kind of problem areas in Iowa for a while now. This is not a new big surprise for us like it was last year. So we're actually looking at those big, what we call the I states, those big corn producing states. We're looking at bigger production this year than we saw last year. Look at a couple more crops, a couple more states that are big corn areas. You're looking at Minnesota. And again, I got to get my eyeballs to focus here. Minnesota is looking at a decrease in total bushels produced, but not substantial, about 100 million. Okay, what about Nebraska? We're looking at about 100 million increase. So when we look at those 5 states, those are the big core, big bushel states that we need to look at. We're looking at probably flat line to slightly larger. And this is the one that surprised me when I started digging, and I don't have room for all the states, but let's look at North Dakota. This one kind of surprised me if you look at the math. Let's look at the total production in bushels last year versus this year. What do you see? We have a 67% increase in the bushels available of corn this year versus last year. Why? Prevent plant. Rob was whispering in the back. we had our 8 planted acreage last year. Again, if you look on the far left-hand side, we had a huge prevent plant problem last year, especially in North Dakota, in those regions that plant a lot of corn acres. This year, all of those corn acres got planted again. So yes, our yielder's down, but the increase in acres was more than the decrease in yield. So we're actually going to have more bushels available locally within the supply chain than we did last year. And that surprised me because that was not the numbers I was expecting. But when I started digging through, it's like, well, that actually makes some sense. So the fact that we're going to have the second largest corn crop as far as total bushels produced versus the number one crop, and I got to write that down, was 2016-17, is really shouldn't be a big surprise because our total corn acreage also increased. So yes, we have problems in part of the Corn Belt. There are going to be individual farmers that are going to have a really, really tough year. I get that. I understand that. But the market, when we look at market prices, what's happening in the futures market, and also then what happens at the cash market level, we need to think about, well, where are the bushels produced? How many bushels are available? And who's going to use those bushels up? How do we get them from where they're produced to where they're being consumed? So the green line on this chart is the total production, total US production. The red line is total consumption or usage. As Rob pointed out, the bars on the bottom is that stocks to use ratio. It's kind of the same information presented a little bit differently. Based on the numbers we see, again, the expectation for this record corn, the second largest corn production in total bushels, we are going to start to rebuild our inventories. From a pricing standpoint, as I look back in time, if I look kind of historically, like Rob pointed out, this relationship between stocks to use ratio and kind of average prices, that 10% carryover stocks, which is about where we're at right now, seems to be the tipping point. If we have carryover stocks more than 10%, futures market, cash market prices tend to slip and become more stable. The corn market becomes comfortable because you have some reserves in case there's some problems someplace or some shocks to the system. But if we get under 10%, the market gets really kind of nervous and uncomfortable. We tend to see higher average prices and a lot more volatility because every new piece of information has a bigger shock value because our margin for error is much thinner. So when we look at, as Betsy was talking about, that old crop versus new crop mentality, the old crop from 2020 is going to be very different from 2021. And I'm guessing, and I agree with you, that 2022 is going to be different again. And I'll talk a little bit about kind of 2022 and what we might see towards the end of my talk here. So I know very soon, in probably a month or so, we're going to start shifting away from, well, how many bushels do we have? Because we're going to have better harvest data. We're going to know what test weights are. We're going to have a better read on what kind of yields we're actually going to deal with. We're going to shift fairly quickly to, okay, well, now we know how many bushels we have. What about this demand base? Has high prices started to restrict or limit usage? Again, I'm going to use USDA as kind of that starting point for this discussion. I want to put this in historical context. So the blue line on top is feed and residual. So primarily it's the feed pile, it's livestock, the livestock sector. The red line is ethanol. The black line is exports. I do want to talk a little bit more about exports in detail. And then the green line is kind of everything else. Those little dashes and dots on the far right-hand side are the current USDA estimates. So here's my point. We tend not to see big shifts or adjustments in livestock feed consumption because our livestock herd doesn't typically adjust up or down rapidly. We see adjustments, we see kind of adjustments in feed rations, but the total base tends to stay relatively stable. Ethanol as well. We do see some volatility, some variability from month to month or week to week on the ethanol numbers. We are seeing a recovery in ethanol profitability. We are seeing some recovery in gasoline consumption because we're starting to drive some more miles. That should be positive for ethanol demand. The one that's always the question mark in my mind is what happens to exports. Last year, we had record export levels. There was a couple of reasons for that. The biggest one, the surprise to the marketplace, the reason we started to see a rally in corn shortly after harvest, it's a timing issue. Why did that happen? Because China stepped in and started buying corn. We anticipated, we expected that they would buy some, but they continue to buy and buy much larger quantities than we ever expected. In fact, if you look at now the closeout for this 2020 marketing year, the old crop, the stuff we did last year, China was our number one corn customer. Typically, Mexico is our number one buyer, but China suppressed them last year. So right now, as of last year's numbers, China is our number one corn buyer. The question is, will they do a repeat performance? What's going to happen with their buying habits, with the timing of their purchases, and how will that play out? I really don't know that. We're all trying to figure that out. But in my viewpoint, that one thing, it will be the shock value or that bigger uncertainty about what will happen to corn prices as we move forward. If the Chinese come in, and I suspect, I'm pretty much guaranteed they will buy some US corn. The question is how much. If they come in and purchase less than we expect, I think we're going to see a softening of corn. If they come in and buy larger than we expect, larger than last year, which is possible, obviously then that will be a surprise and try and start to lift corn prices. as I see it right now, what is the demand base for corn in China? Their livestock sector has stabilized. One of the reasons they came in and purchased so much US corn, they were trying to rebuild their hog herd after African swine fever. They had already had an expansion of some of their other livestock sector like aquaculture and poultry and even dairy. And so there was a stronger demand base for feed products, not only soybean meal, but also corn. Right now, that the livestock sector has stabilized. In fact, profit margins for hog production have actually been negative. Crush margins in China have been negative. So we're questioning, well, is there growth potential from the numbers we saw last year? I'm not really sure yet. We're going to have to wait and see. So let me talk about historical movements. You know, Betsy brought it up. There's a question a little bit about, well, how many times, you know, if I forward contract, how many times I'm going to be wrong? And you can look backwards. It is kind of a tricky thing to do if you want to really do it correctly. I mean, I trust Ed Ussett's math and his procedures, so I'll defer to him on that one. But I had a lot of questions this summer trying to compare this year's corn market with kind of the glory years of 2011, 2012, and 13. So I put together this long-term price chart. Now, this would be for nearby futures. For you marketing geeks like me, this is nearby futures contracts. That was the easiest for me to try and pull. And I pulled these numbers as of last night. So I needed to prepare and send this in so we could have it all ready to go today. My point is, look at the price levels we saw this summer relative to the price numbers that we saw not only in 2008, which was really a spike with a drop again, but again, those glory years of 2011, 2012, and 2013. What do you see? I put in the black line and the black lines and red line. The black lines represent kind of what was that peak, that the upper range that we would likely see this year. The bottom would be kind of this lower range given very tight supplies. And then red was kind of that midpoint. What did we see this summer? Yes, we did spike up. And I'll show you some numbers in just a minute about when those highs occurred and what that might mean for your future marketing plans. But look at where we are today. The question is, everybody's asking, so where do we go from here? We were kind of counting on and relying on some major production problems, this concern that we may not have much of a crop of corn this year again, like we did in 2008, that caused the spike. Well, once the weather started to turn, we got some more rains. We realized that the Eastern Corn Belt was going to have a pretty good year. We started to relax a little bit. Now that we're getting some better yield estimates, we're starting to relax a little bit more and saying, well, maybe this isn't going to be as bad a year production-wise as we thought it was going to be. Okay, now I've done this presentation kind of all summer long. Some of you may have seen it, some may not have. But I also wanted to point out, when did the December futures, thinking about a forward contracting plan, at what time of year was that December futures price? If we could somehow hit that top price for harvest delivery, we got lucky and actually hit the number. When did that occur and what was the price level? So I went back to those, let me go back in my slide deck here. Those big spikes you see, when did those occur? So in 08, it happened in end of June. 11 happened in mid-June. 2012, it wasn't until August. Actually, in 2013, it was January of the previous year. So we ran into 13 as we started to rebuild and get more acres, and all of a sudden things collapsed. So forward pricing would have, when does the spike happen? When does the peak happen? It's usually in that midsummer growing season, when the risk of or uncertainty of yield and yield potential is the highest. When did it happen this year? We don't know yet because the December contract hasn't closed. We're not stopped trading yet. Could we have a spike? Theoretically, it's possible. I think the odds are relatively low. The high point for the December contract was May 7th. So let's come back to that forward contracting issue. Doing some forward contracting, I agree with Betsy. I've historically, that has been a very solid base marketing plan. The question is, when we get into those growing season, what do we do at that point? How much of a risk do you want to take? Okay, and this is where we get some nuances into the marketing plans. And there's this trade-off between locking in prices and being exposed to yield risk, or not locking in prices, and then all of a sudden the risk that prices will fall. And given the material tonight, we don't have time to go into that detail. I have some ideas on strategies that might help you with that. So where are we today? Again, I pulled this chart last night. We were up a little bit today on the close. You know, what kind of pattern do you see here? And again, I put in the blue lines as support and resistance levels. I like to use the KISS rule, keep it simple, stupid. Let's just pick those previous highs and lows as the psychological barriers. We literally went down and touched that psychological barrier we saw in mid-June earlier this year. Are we going to start to rebuild from here? I think we'll start to rebuild some, but it's going to be limited just because now we're going to have this harvest pressure. The combines will start rolling pretty soon, and we do have some things going on we need to be looking at, but I think it's going, in my opinion, it's going to be relatively flat going into this harvest period. We likely will not see any kind of rallies, in my viewpoint, until we get into probably that November, December time period, and we start really focusing on that demand base, and then more importantly, what's going to happen in South America. So let's look at what the market's telling us today. And I showed you this last year. I updated the numbers for as of yesterday. So what Rob showed you earlier was historically, looking backwards, what was the relationship between the price bids in the international market, the global market, for different loading points. So this is similar, but what I've done is I've got information about the forward bids. Okay, so we're looking at the cost of grain loaded onto a vessel and the freight rates, ocean freight, for delivery to North Asia. So North Asia would include Japan, Korea, and China. Those would be the big buyers. So this would be an estimate of the price delivered to a port in Korea or Japan or China. And I looked at different sources for corn versus the delivery point. So given this information right now today, these are bids as of yesterday for delivery into the future, just like the local elevators bidding for your grain to be delivered at different time periods. And what do you see? Who's got the best bid for corn? If I'm buying corn and I'm in Japan or I'm in China thinking, hey, I'm going to buy some US corn or corn from the global market, where's the best loading point? Well, in this graph, we want to be in the bottom of the graph, not on the top of the graph. And what does it show? USPNW. And that, in my opinion, is one of the reasons we're seeing this strong corn basis level right in the middle of harvest. Yes, we're going to have lower yields than we expected, but because of some of the problems with Hurricane Ida, some of the issues going on in the Louisiana Gulf, some of those purchases now are being shifted into that PNW ports. Some of that corn will come from this region, but the PNW port is also going to have to work very aggressively to try and get some corn from Nebraska, from eastern South Dakota, possibly from southwest Minnesota, to move that direction west instead of going south into the Gulf. Plus, with very, very high freight rates, the shorter the haul, the cheaper the freight. Okay. So what's interesting to me is this extends for a fairly long time period. The other thing I want to point to is the green one, that green line. Look at the green line and the price out of the US Gulf. And when does that suddenly drop off? Well, about January. And for those large, again, Rob showed some pictures of the Cargill facilities. I know CHS has had problems. ADM has had some facilities that have been damaged. They're working to try and bring those back up as quickly as possible. The most recent estimates I heard was about 30% volume reduction for the next 3 to 4 months. out of the Gulf. And it could take up to 6 to 8 months for it to get back to 100%. So we're going to have shipments through the Gulf, but they're going to be at a much slower volume. So where do we get those deliveries? And one of the things we're seeing now is that the prices are reflecting the fact that we, being the US Gulf, can't receive corn and soybeans as quickly as we normally would. All right, I better keep going or I'll make it to the end here. Let's shift to soybeans, kind of the same process. I'll go through some of the same basic information. Again, I want to talk, just make sure that you have for a record, here's the supply demand balance sheet for soybeans. Let's talk about a few of the numbers. So just like in the corn example, the red line that bounces around is the national average yield. The blue line that runs through the middle is that trend line, kind of what would be our new average yield adjusted for, again, technology and better genetics. If we look at the far right-hand side, look at the dotted line, the red line, that's the current USDA forecast. It looks as though we're going to have slightly above average yields. So again, not a fantastic year, but not a horrible year. Question.
Got a question. I hope this doesn't mean HRS and soybeans will be cut short. Didn't really need to hear all that about corn. Actually, it's a comment.
It's his comment. Okay, fair enough. But so one of the things that the reason I went through corn, now, hang on, this ties into wheat. So just please bear with me. There's a transportation issue with again, higher volumes to the PNW. And we got to be a little bit careful about some crowding out that might go on between commodities. And then the other thing is, in a few moments, I'm going to talk about the price relationships between corn, hard red winter wheat, and hard red spring wheat. So please be patient, bear with me, I'll get there. Okay, I promise I'll get to something interesting in the wheat markets. So beans, if you look at the I states, those what we consider the I states, the big eastern, the core of the soybean production region, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, they're all going to have larger crops this year than they did last year. Again, part of that is a shift in planted acreage. Part of it is adjustments in yield. So we're counting bushels. We look at Minnesota, their bushel count will be down a little bit, but Missouri and Nebraska will be up. We look at North Dakota, and it's actually down, but not as dramatically as I would have expected. Again, given the comparison of USDA's 25 bushel yield this year versus about a 33.5 bushel last year. We increased our planted acreage as part of that compensation. So the issue I'm trying to bring up, just like in the corn story, yeah, we have some areas of some problems, but if you look at it in a bigger sense, which is what the grain markets, both cash and futures, are worried about, there will be bushels available. Now, we're also looking at some very strong demand base. So what's our margin for error? Yes, we're going to have good supplies. It looks as though right now, based on forecasts, we're going to have very good demand base. What does that do to our ending stocks? How much of a margin for error are we going to have? On soybeans, our margin for error is going to be tight. And I expect that to continue to be tight most of this rest of the season, which will put a lot of pressure on the South American crop, and the US prices are going to be very sensitive, like usual, to weather conditions, in particular in Brazil, but also in Argentina. So when the carryover stocks are small, we tend to see high prices. They tend to be extremely volatile. I do anticipate soybean prices will continue to be volatile as we move through the rest of this marketing year, just because our margin for error is still going to be slim. Look at uses, two big uses, the crushing demand and exports. I do want to comment really quick on crush demand. There are some things happening in soybean oil that are actually helping lift the soybean oil prices pretty substantially. Some of that has to do with some energy policy in California. Some of it has to do with the meal demand coming internationally. We have, even though we're going to have some new crushing plants come online across the United States, it will still be a couple of years before those are actually able to crush some beans. So short term, we're looking at the capacity we have right now today. Again, in the soybean market, exports tends to be that thing that is the biggest unknown, creates the most volatility. In the world of soybeans, China is the market. our second and third on the list for soybean export pace is so small compared to China. It's not rounding error, but it's something that you would have to have some really unusual, substantial things happen. For example, Mexico is typically our number 2 buyer of US soy, and it's very small relative to China. Price volatility. This is the same thing, long-term charts. Where are we today relative to what we saw in those golden years of 2011, 2012, and 2013? We see some similar patterns, don't we? Now, I don't know that there's a tremendous amount of downside risk right now, unless, again, Brazil has this monster crop that everybody thinks they're going to have. When did those contract highs occur? When did we see historically, when did we see that highest price that everybody was shooting for harvest delivery? It was in July in 2008, August, end of August, actually in 2011, September of 2012, June of 2013, May of 2014, and guess what? It was June of this year. Unless we suddenly see some kind of major rally that I don't anticipate. Where do we go from here? Similar to corn, I think we found, in my opinion, some support levels. I think we, with the information we have right now and everything, kind of the information in the marketplace, I don't know that we have a lot of downside risk in soybeans. We have some upside potential, but during this harvest season, I do anticipate we're going to be kind of in a sideways pattern. What about export bids? I've showed this before. I just want to emphasize, what's our export window for soybeans into North Asia? Right now, for October, November, December, and parts of January, we're the lowest bid. What happens when we get into January and February? When we start to get those soybeans coming out of South America, and again, anticipating that they have a big crop. If I'm a soybean buyer out of China right now, and I'm looking at this chart, what am I trying to do? What's my purchasing plan for soybeans? Buy only as much soybean as I need from the US to get us to the Brazilian harvest. We have to be thinking about what is the buyer thinking as well as what we as sellers think. Let's finally get to something interesting, talk about wheat. Okay, Rob already did a nice job of setting this up. I don't want to repeat the things that he showed you. Yes, we're finally starting to take US wheat supplies down. This is all wheat, and that is helpful. He showed you also on the spring wheat side, yes, this is going to be an exceptionally tight crop. One of the arguments I've had with some farmers via email and phone conversation is, well, but will today's production meet domestic demand? And what about the export market? I see, yeah, we're going to have a short crop, but we came into the season with some pretty good reserves. And I talked to a lot of farmers midsummer. Their big question was not when should I sell 2021 wheat? It was, when do I sell the wheat that's been in inventory I've been carrying for the last several years? When do I clean out my old crop? And those old crop supplies are helping buffer this lower crop that we're seeing now today out of the US. How is the market going to adjust? Who are the buyers that are going to adjust? Again, the one that's typically most price sensitive is the export market, which accounts for about half of the spring wheat that we produce, goes overseas. Domestic buyers, I know they're going to complain. I know they're worried about their bottom lines, but you know what? They will pay for the wheat that they need. They're going to pay the price to prevent that spring wheat from leaving the country. But what about the export market? How price sensitive is that? In some cases, for some buyers, very price sensitive. For others, are fortunately for our big buyers of spring wheat, the Philippines, Japan, Taiwan, they're not as price sensitive, but they are quality sensitive. Okay, so some of those countries do have the ability to pay for the higher prices. Some of them do not. And I do expect to see a drop off in exports simply because we are going to have very tight supplies. So let's talk about this relationship. And I know I'm getting very close to time, but this is important. Spring wheat is a blend wheat. It is a specialty wheat. Spring wheat can only have so much of a price premium over winter wheat, which is typically our base wheat. And what I tried to show here is what's that price relationship between Minneapolis spring wheat and Kansas City hard red winter wheat. And if we look back historically, that price differential, it looks like spring wheat, with the exception of 2008, which was an anomaly. The kind of that maximum spread is about $2 to $2.50 a bushel. So think about it as the winter wheat crop as a big rock, and the spring wheat market as a rubber band trying to pull this rock up. That rubber band can only stretch so far before some of our customers start switching away and saying, spring wheat's too expensive, I'm going to try something else. Now, we've seen that price spread narrow, meaning that the spring wheat market does have some room to work independently, but not a lot. So we still have this larger supply of winter wheat that's really limiting the upward movement of spring wheat. So what's going to cause the winter wheat market to go up? So let's look at the relationship between winter wheat and corn. Because the big concern for hard red winter wheat in particular, but also soft red winter, is if corn goes up in price and wheat does not, the livestock sector is so large, it'll chew up wheat so fast, it'll make your head spin. And the wheat market knows that. So as corn prices come up, we need to keep a premium to corn to be able to prevent it from going into the livestock sector. Now, this is actually kind of flipped. So think of it as a mirror image upside down. So when it falls below, like we saw a few months ago, that meant that the corn price went up and winter wheat didn't, which there was a threat of a bunch of winter wheat going to the feed channels. And what happened? Winter wheat responded. And as the winter wheat price came up, that allowed the spring wheat price to also travel higher, because the spring wheat market isn't big enough and strong enough to pull all those markets with it. So the question I had was, well, why isn't spring wheat higher than it is today? And the simple reason is we got too much winter wheat and the corn market isn't allowing winter wheat to come up. So as corn has softened, we've seen winter wheat come down. We've also seen some of the spring wheat start to take a little bit of money out as well. So there is this indirect linkage. It's not a direct one from spring wheat to corn, but an indirect linkage between corn, winter wheat, and spring wheat. I just want to graphically kind of show you these relationships have boundaries. There's only so much of a price spread we can get between these commodities. Let's talk a little about Canada, and then I'm going to wrap up for questions. Hopefully there will be a few. I appreciate your patience. We're starting to get harvest reports coming out of the spring wheat area of Canada. Now, spring wheat, the Canadians on average produce about 50% more spring wheat than we do here in the States. So what happens in Canada obviously has a big impact on global wheat supplies. Now, Statistics Canada, which is kind of like our USDA, came out with their yield estimates recently. And now as we get into harvest, Saskatchewan Ag, which is kind of the provincial department of Ag for Saskatchewan, is starting to try and record what kind of yields are farmers actually reporting. Now we're getting quite a difference between the numbers coming out of Saskatchewan agriculture, kind of that provincial level, and what's happening out of Stats Canada, which is the national level. And the Saskatchewan numbers, at least for the early harvested spring wheat, are much lower than what the more bigger kind of national numbers are going to be. So the spring wheat market is starting to get a little bit nervous that, well, that Canadian spring wheat crop may not be quite as big as what we first anticipated, or at least the forecast coming out of the Statistics Canada, which is the national level. So this is the average percent of average precipitation. They've had anywhere from 50 to 60% of normal rainfall. When we look at the Drought Monitor maps for Canada, we see some similar things going on that we saw here in North Dakota and Montana. So those dry regions extend up into both the Manitoba region, but also into Saskatchewan, which is the big producer for spring wheat, durum, as well as canola. So the moral of the story, the spring wheat market is starting to get a little nervous again. The durum market is getting very nervous about what is the size of that Canadian crop. Spring wheat, where are we at today relative to those spikes we saw? you know, we're getting up there. We're not at historical highs, but we're getting close. And again, I threw out the 2008 event. The $20 spring wheat we saw was an anomaly. There was a weird set of things that occurred to make that happen. It happened in February, which is an off-cycle reason. There's a bunch of weird things that happen. I'm going to throw that out. If we look at modern recent history, where do we see those high levels? We're getting very close to those high watermarks that we saw in previous years. Let's look at the September contract. When did we see that spike? When was the highest price? If you got lucky and actually contracted for harvest delivery at the right time, when did that happen? And if you actually look in 2008, the September contract, not the nearby, but the September contract, it was at 14 bucks in February. 2011, it was in May, end of May. 2012, end of July. 2013, mid-August. 2017, mid-July. When did it happen this year? Mid-August. And this contract has stopped trading, so we know that that is the high. So coming back to, does forward contracting work? Well, yes, it depends. Even in these weird rally years that we see, the highs are reached usually mid-summer. Now I'm going to shift to winter wheat because, as I said before, what's limiting spring wheat prices from going higher is U.S. hard red winter wheat. What do you see on this graph? Again, this is prices going forward for delivery. If I'm a wheat buyer internationally, where am I going to buy my hard red winter wheat? Why is the U.S. or U.S. Gulf so high relative to everybody else? Part of it is we've got high corn prices, so U.S. hard red winter wheat has to be high enough that it doesn't go into a feed ration someplace. The other part is we're having some troubles with our export facilities, in particular out of the Gulf, which is most of where our hard red winter wheat is shipped out of. Okay, so this is the problem that the hardwood winter wheat crop has, is we need to lower a price to be competitive with our other suppliers of hard red winter wheat. But if we get that low, it'll all go into the feed channels. Questions? That was burning through it, guys. Yes.
All right, what do you think chances for very strong Durham prices to continue into planting 2022? And same for spring wheat.
Okay, so let's talk about the Durham one first. We're taking Durham supplies down and inventories down really hard. The Durham industry, there's some large Durham, some semolina mills that got caught short, meaning that they hadn't purchased enough to meet their demand base. And we saw that spike in Durham prices. They've softened a little bit in the last week or so, but I don't anticipate much downside risk in Durham for this marketing year. The Durham industry, like a lot of other industries, for example, the malt barley, the pinto beans, black beans, sunflower, I think is going to be in the same case. They're all going to have to be very competitive from a contracting standpoint to either hold acres or possibly increase acres. I do think the Durham industry is going to try and work to increase those Durham supplies. The big wild card again is what's happening in Canada. The Canadians produce about 10 times the amount of Durham the United States does. So what happens in Manitoba and more importantly in Saskatchewan in their hardcore Durham area is going to have the bigger influence. So my opinion, downside risk is pretty limited. There's some important buyers that were caught short. I think the Durham industry is going to have to work pretty hard contracting to try and increase some acres next year, because we're going to have to try and rebuild some of those stocks. If this stays dry, man, 2022 could be a really, really interesting year for Durham. Spring wheat, similar things. My opinion right now is the spring wheat futures market. If you look at September 2022 spring wheat futures, my opinion, I don't think those are quite high enough to be able to attract and maintain the acreage base we're going to need both in the US and Canada to be able to meet our supplies, because the industry is going to want to not only maintain the supply chain, but also try and rebuild some inventories to have some cushion, to have some buffer. My opinion, when you look at spring wheat futures relative to corn and soybeans, I don't think they're quite there yet to be able to make that run. Hopefully that answered the question. Others? Very quiet. Well, again, thank you for your time and attention this evening. I apologize for some of the technical issues. You guys know how to get a hold of me if you do have some questions that come up later on. So thank you very much. I'll hand it back to you guys.
Thank you, Fran. That was an excellent presentation. And just a few closing comments here. One thing, I guess, Minnesota wheat growers, we'd like to invite you to our Prairie Grains Conference, which is scheduled for December 8th and 9th in Grand Forks, North Dakota. So it's both Minnesota wheat and North Dakota grain growers gets together there. So we'd like to see everyone attend that if they can. And I guess at this time, this concludes our 2021 marketing seminar. We would like to thank our speakers once again. Our presentations will be online at minnesotawheat.org next week. And a final thank you to our program sponsors, Minnesota Association of Wheat Growers, North Dakota Grain Growers, AgCountry Farm Credit Services, and Northern Crop Institute. Thank you to everyone attending the virtual 2021 marketing seminar, and have a great evening.